Hello, friends. Welcome to the ATC Double Cut. My name is Michael Woods. I have been on a long trip, and I'm in a hotel room in Tokyo now. Yesterday, I wrote a blog post about one of the first stops I made on the trip, which was a visit that a lot of you have been curious about. It was a visit to visit the Talking Greenkeeper and see the grass and talk about grass with him at the Montchanin Course that he manages. And I was hoping that I could talk with him, and I'm going to try to call him up now on the property. So let's see if we can do this. Let's see. Joe Gulotti. Hello. Good morning.
Good morning, Micah. How are you? Or it should be good evening.
Yeah, it's evening. I finished. I just went out for okonomiyaki in Tokyo, and then I came back, and looks like you're out at the golf course.
I am out at the golf course. It's a nice, cool morning. We got some much needed rain last night, and the place is shining, looking wonderful.
Well, that is very good to hear. I was surprised when I visited there. I think the day that I visited was July 28th, if I remember correctly, or July
Yes.
29th. And and it took me a while, and I wrote about this in the blog post, which I'm going to show. It took me a while to wrap my head around what I was seeing because I kept noticing the tees looked so good, and then you mentioned they weren't irrigated, and I was like, "How?" And then the greens had like some spots that were perfect, and some areas you could tell didn't get as much irrigation, and you said you had to hand water a lot. Those only had like one sprinkler per green, right? So I can see where that timely rainfall could be really helpful.
Yeah, it definitely helped because, hey, listen, you also mentioned our 21% organic material in the
Mm-hmm.
blog post. And last week, we just did a very aggressive top dress first, half-inch solid tine on 2-inch spacing, probably going about 2.5 inches deep.
Ooh.
And we got lit up. It was pretty dry last week, and we had some spots that were pretty lit up. We did the short games first. Short games greens are pretty good. They turned out nice, but we had some spots on the Montchanin that got pretty lit up. So it was particularly in the areas where we don't receive irrigation, and we've been pounding those all week. So it was really nice to get that rain probably about 9 p.m. here last night. So yeah, it was much needed. Give us a little bump, and a cool front moved in. It's I'll go Celsius here. It's probably about 18 to 19 degrees, and
Ooh.
we're overcast, and yeah, it's a nice sigh of relief.
Nice. Well, I've got to ask a hard question here. Can I? You probably thought this would be a friendly interview, but I'm going to hit you with the tough question. Did you put extra fertilizer before you did that solid tine to make sure that it recovers quick? I just wonder because I always did that. Everybody does that. And I'm thinking the answer to that's going to be yes. Did you?
Not before, because I didn't quite have the time. I'm pretty short staffed right now. I wanted to get a little out before, but I did go out the. So we aerated the short game greens on Monday. We did the Montchanin greens on Tuesday. And then Wednesday, I went out with a tenth of a pound of melted down urea and hit it with that. And we got a really nice response from that.
Okay, so your extra fertilizer in this case was a tenth of a pound of fast release nitrogen.
Yes, yeah. And it was based on the growth versus expected, or the turf speedo, or whatever we're calling it now.
Hey, it's the GVX. I was going to ask you because we talked about that a month ago, and I was so glad to know that you were using the GVX. And then we went and saw John Jacob over at Deerfield. He's also using the GVX. And when we talked about the exact way to calculate it, and I wondered what type of GVX growth versus expected have you been running through coming into late August?
Our numbers were low. Lower than I expect. I'm looking to get at 80 on the Montchanin greens and 40 on the short game greens. And our 14-day on the short game greens, we're probably at about 28 to 30. And on Montchanin, I was at like 50 to 60. So I know I needed to add some urea anyway. And I
Mm-hmm.
think if the growth rate was where I wanted it, I probably wouldn't have added the nitrogen. The nitrogen was more or less because my G growth versus expected was lower than what I wanted. So I wanted that bump anyway. And it just happened to coincide with the aeration. But I think if the growth was where I wanted it, I don't think I would have added that in because I am battling such high organic material in that top 2 centimeters. I just didn't feel like I'm really looking to reduce my nitrogen inputs because of that.
Okay, that makes perfect sense, and you gave a very good answer to that difficult question. Well done. Did you happen to listen to the USGA Green Section podcast that they put out 2 weeks ago, where they talked to Richard Forsyth from Royal Melbourne
I
Golf
have
Club?
not gotten around to that one yet, Micah.
So he's got a crazy tidbit in there because he mentions that he doesn't really top dress, but basically those greens basically don't get top dressed, maybe once a year, something like that. And he said that by the time they get around, every 10 or 12 years to doing that, cut the sod off and then scrape the organic material off from underneath and then drop the sod back down. He said that their organic matter is something like 20%. But he doesn't really measure it, but he knows that if he would measure it, those are the types of numbers he'd get. And I thought of you, and I'm like, we don't have to be terrified. We don't have to panic if we get a really high organic matter. But I do think that with the type of surfaces you're trying to produce, it is a good idea to do that sand top dressing and make some holes through that rather impressive layer that I'll bring up on the screen now.
Wow, thanks for embarrassing me.
Well,
Nah, nothing will ever trump Rich Buckley for posting the
yeah,
picture of
I don't
Ted
think
Turner.
this will turn up on Google. Well, I mean, I started off showing a pretty picture of the first green and those nice
Yeah,
pine
that is a
trees
very nice
behind it.
picture.
And then the second hole, and so there's the tee down there that's just looks flawless for an unirrigated tee. And those are Bermuda grass, of course, which is really a good turf if you're not going to put much irrigation on it. And then you look out at the second hole, in that fairway from a distance, it looks like pure bent grass, and it's got a sharp mowing line around it. Really nice definition between the fairway and the rough. And then you look at the green in the distance, looks nice, but and it's got those fancy flag sticks on the black. Is it the Black Gate course? Is
Well,
is that
yeah,
kind of the name
the
that you call it?
the course is on Blackgates Road,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a whole story behind it. My friend is the library curator at Hagley Museum, which is basically the library for the Duponts, and
Mm-hmm.
this whole area has just been owned by the Duponts. It's Dupont Estates. They call it the Chateau Country, and I asked him because when my father was alive, he'd always ask me how the Blackgates course is, and that's what it was called back in the day when he was an avid golfer. And they've since changed the name of Montchanin. So I asked my friend who was the library curator why it's called Blackgates Road. And supposedly in the late 1800s, one of the estate owners, one of the DuPonts, his wife, whose name was Dorcas, that's a name you're not seeing often these days. Dorcas
No.
DuPont passed away, and he was so distraught that he traded in all his horses for black horses, uh, and he painted the gates to his estate black, hence Black Gates. So I thought it would be a nice shout out to the DuPonts and the history of the area here if I went to a black flag just to sort of represent that history of Black Gates, if that makes
And
any sense.
That makes sense, and it looks nice. And yeah, so I think you're pretty well known as a podcaster, and you have an audience, a worldwide audience. And you talk about you on your show, you talk with your guests, of course, and you tell some stories about various things. And some of the things that you tell stories about or talk about is work that you've been doing or things that are happening on the golf course. So I think, of course, I was curious, what kind of grass does this guy produce? Let me go see. And I think a lot of other people are too, because I've had multiple people after they knew that I visited, they've asked me, so tell me, what was the grass like? So I was so glad to see it. And you can see, like, at the back of this green, there's some grass in the rough or the green surrounds that's a bit dry. And that's because it's unirrigated, cool season turf in a very hot summer. But the green surface itself is 100% grass cover and really, really nice.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's we work hard on it, and we take pride in the surfaces we generate with the limited resources of irrigation here. For example, I put a wetting agent down this past Wednesday, and I ran the one head, and I had a helper behind me with a roller base and a hose that snapped into the quick coupler, and that person watered the back. And it's time consuming. It's, I wouldn't say labor intensive, but it's laborious, right? It's not crazy tough, but it's a hustle job. And that person was following me around from all the greens, just watering in to make sure we got that wetting agent watered in. So yeah, it's it's tricky and it's challenging with one irrigation head, and sometimes I wish we had three more. But
Yeah,
I don't
it's
think that's happening anytime soon, and I've been dealing with this since the summer of 2020, and I've learned how to do it. I don't want to say correctly because I feel like there's always more to learn, but I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on how to manage these greens with the irrigation system we have.
that was my impression also. I I've never managed greens that had only one irrigation head. So to see the condition that good, I was impressed. And you were very quick. I was jet lagged when you were flashing that 21 OM2 symbol, and I took the picture, and then I was looking at it like 5 days later, and I was like, what symbol was Joe making with that two and the one? That's not the ATC double cut gang symbol. Uh, and, and then I was like, oh, right.
Or
The
the length of
OM2
my
is
you know
21%
what.
on those greens.
Yeah, 21, and it's not the length of my, my private part either.
Yeah.
That's that next picture is more
Yeah.
represents that.
Yeah.
But anyway,
No,
yeah, the
no
21%.
issues with that. No issues with that. Right.
No, hey, listen, it's got me a very beautiful wife, so I'll
Yeah.
take it. But anyway,
Perfect.
yeah, so the 2-1 was representing the 21%.
And then we pulled a core. This is from the short course
Yeah,
greens, right? Or
yeah.
the is that what is you call the? It's not the short course. It's the
Short
practice
game. We
area,
call it
right?
the short game
Short
practice area.
short game. That's right. And what bent grass variety is this again? Was it
A1, A4.
A1 A4? That's right. I was surprised that these greens are like 3 or 4 years or 5 years old, something like that, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Which one of those many numbers that I spit out is closest to correct?
I'm sorry, Micah.
How many years old?
Okay,
Uh,
so they were grown in the summer of 2019, and they were
okay, so
open for play in the summer of 2000, so in the spring of 2020.
and they were seeded.
Seeded in the summer of 19, so 20, 21, 22, 23. They're they're in their fifth season right now.
Okay, and I'm showing on the screen a really impressive layer of organic material on top of sand. And I could confirm that we were able to squeeze some water out of that with finger pressure. And the OM2 tested at 21%. And generally, when you have that much of a difference between the organic material at the surface and then the relatively clean sand underneath, maybe that's the type of thing that you want to deal with. So I thought the turf surfaces were just fine, but still it seems like why have that much organic material? Maybe just reduce it a bit. And the typical way to reduce it is to grow less organic material, let it decompose, and add some sand, which will instantly reduce your percentage of organic material in the soil. And when you punch holes, it helps to get air through that layer, and it also helps to create space through which the sand can be added. So you can add more sand if you create some space by punching holes. So you've now done that twice, right? You did that in the spring, and then you've done it again last week.
Yes, and we're going to do it again in October.
Oh man. Yeah, I think that's going to set you on a nice track, especially if you're running your GVX on these greens. But I think you can, or I will explain why I think you're running the GVX like this. The practice area, short game area, those greens are basically 100% bank grass, and so you feel comfortable running the GVX a little bit lower. On the Montchanin course, it's primarily bent grass, but there is a little bit of Poa annua out there. And to avoid creating too much of a difference between the bent grass and the Poa, which if you really run the GVX low, which means the grass is not growing very much and you're not supplying much nitrogen to cause the grass to grow, what will happen is the Poa annua tends to turn really yellow, and you end up highlighting the difference between the grasses. And so sometimes it's better to run a little bit more nitrogen through that and grow the grass a little bit more. So I think that's why you're having the target, I think you said, of about 60 on the Montchanin course.
80.
80.
But, that number, that was a recommended number to me. And I think I could probably get away with a little lower, even though our growth rate was a little slower and not where I wanted it at that 80. I felt like it was performing just fine at the 50 to 60 mark. So perhaps I can play with that number a little bit over the years and think about it and just observe it and see what I see. And if I feel like I need to get to 80, I'll get to 80. If I feel like I can lower it to 60, I'll lower it to 60. So it's just, that's a number that's going to continuously, I think, change throughout the years.
Mm-hmm. And
Hey,
that's
Mike,
something you
real
can,
quick,
yeah.
my battery is on my phone is really, it's burning this up. Can we pause for a second? I'll go back to my office and plug in and we can pick this back up.
Yeah. I will pause this.
All right, cool. I'll be right back. Maybe you can do an ad read for the Talking Greenkeeper while I'm away.
Oh, or do an ad. Yeah, I can do an ad read for something.
Awesome. Very good.
All
All
right.
right, I'll be right
Thanks.
back.
Thanks. Give me a call back. We're back. Welcome, Joe. I was just getting ready to do that ad read, so let me finish that up. Get ready for season 7 of the Talking Greenkeeper podcast with Joe Gulotti. Dive deep into the world of turf management with expert insights, engaging interviews, and the latest trends in the industry. Don't miss out and stay ahead of the game. Welcome back, Joe.
Thank you,
Did
Mike.
I get that
was a
right?
fun.
Is it season 7 or is it season
Yes,
6? Well,
season 7, man. Season 7. Yes.
okay, so you're finishing up season 6, coming up season
Season 6
7.
is finished. I was
Oh,
supposed to do one last Tuesday, but we had an unexpected team meeting for Stevie's soccer team that I had to go to. And I tried to reschedule for Wednesday, couldn't make it happen. So I'm not doing an episode this week. And I have a very special guest joining me next Tuesday, live in the basement of the Killer Brick Rancher. And we'll be kicking off season 7. And he started off season 1. Mark McGreevy. Mark McGreevy is going to be on with me. I'll just tell everybody.
oh, good. You can ask him if he's collecting clipping volume yet.
Oh, I know. Well, he won't, but I have some really good arguments that I'm going to throw his way to why he should. Because Mark loves to save money. He he's really frugal and he's really good at it. And I'm going to use the money aspect. I'm going to throw that at him.
Okay. Uh, that's a good one. I will tell you, I was surprised at all of the places that I visited. I forget exactly. I shared it on my Instagram at some point. The like 13 or 14 courses in 9 states or something that I visited on this recent trip to the United States. And I was surprised almost every place I visited, they measure clipping volume. And it started off, the first course I visited was you at the Montchanin Course. You're measuring clipping volume. We went to Deerfield. They're measuring clipping volume. And I think a lot of places that are measuring it, because I visited a lot of very nice facilities, they're measuring clipping volume not for the purpose of saving money, but for the purpose of getting better grass conditions and getting more control of the grass, like we saw at the U.S. Amateur, where I spent my last week in the U.S. working with Chris Trittabaugh and the excellent team there at Hazeltine National. My goodness, those greens were consistent, and they were really good. They just got a single cut in the morning. They got a roll, and they got no afternoon mowing or rolling. So they just got a single cut and a roll every morning, and they were at championship conditions. So uh, that that was really impressive, and that happens by managing how much the grass grows, I think.
Yeah, and I watched some of the amateur on TV that weekend, and it did look outstanding. The surfaces looked immaculate and looked like they were performing very well. And I was really psyched for Chris and his staff. But the money, I think, where the money saving aspect comes in, and how I've been kind of doing it this year is I've been basing my nitrogen applications and my plant growth regulator applications based on off the growth versus expected, and it's been very simple. If I have the growth rate where I want it, I don't need to add nitrogen.
Mm-hmm.
If it's growing too slowly, I add nitrogen, and if it's growing too fast, I put a PGR. So I'm just not programming or blanketing the turfgrass, which I think a lot of turfgrass managers do, with spoon feeding nitrogen every week or every 2 weeks or whatever program they're on with a growth regulator. So I've been able to, I believe, I haven't gone through the records yet, but significantly reduce the amount of nitrogen I'm using and the amount of PGRs I'm using as well. I don't think I applied a PGR on the greens. I did apply the seed head control in March, but I don't really count that. I did the proxy primo in March, but I didn't put another growth regulator on the greens until July.
Yeah,
And I think,
I'm impressed.
yeah, and it's just based off of the growth versus expected. That's why.
Very good. I I I wish that I'd taken more pictures to show people more about the grass. I did have one picture of your absolutely shredded driving range tee, which
Yes.
inexplicably, you've got those beautiful Bermuda grass tees out there on the golf course, on the Montchanin course, and then the driving range tee that you manage, this big double deck driving range tee, is all creeping bent grass and just shredded for the amount of play that it gets. I didn't show that picture because I think we've all seen shredded bent grass driving range tees, and they're painful to look at.
They're so painful to look at. Guess what we're doing, Micah?
Um, Changing it to artificial turf.
That would be ideal. I would almost welcome that. That would be great. But no, we are in talks right now converting one, if not one of the tees or both tees. I think we should do both tees, but it could be a matter of dollars and cents We're going to convert to Bermuda next season. At
That
least one of the tees.
Yeah, I think at least one of the tees. And while you're at it, maybe make them just a little bit bigger. I mean, you're limited with space, but if you can get even a tiny bit more square footage, that would be nice also.
Isn't that funny? It's I measured it yesterday using Google Earth, and I got approximately for that double decker uh, driving range tee, we're at nearly 53,000 square feet, just a hair over an acre. And you would think that would be plenty of room, but it's not. I mean, you saw how shredded it is, and we're on mats only right now because the tee has just gotten so used. And we're actually next week we are doing a core aeration, drag, uh, overseed, bent grass, top dress on that, in hopes of getting them back on it by the end of September and through the year. And then next year we're gonna at least do one of the tees to bent grass, or excuse me, to Bermuda grass. And yeah, we're in the early stages of that discussion right now.
Yeah, that's something that makes sense to me. I understand having some that matches the surfaces on the golf courses themselves, but it's also nice to have something that's more suitable for a high use tee. And Bermuda grass, I think, is if it doesn't get winter kill, then it seems like it's a pretty solid choice.
Yeah, and you saw the team, Mike, and you saw the divot patterns and just how obliterated it got. I don't think people are really caring much about, oh, all the surfaces on the courses out here are bent grass, so we should have bent grass. No, I think what they're longing for is just something that they can get on and beat balls on. And I think Bermuda grass is perhaps the ideal choice for that.
That's that will be cool to see. Well, I'm looking forward to listening to the next season of the Talking Greenkeeper podcast, so I can hear some updates because I'm sure you're going to share with us how your OM2 goes down or doesn't, and you're going to share how
Yeah.
the GVX is working, and you're going to share this project on the driving range tee. And I was glad that I got a chance to visit because now when you're talking about this stuff, I can visualize it a little bit. In fact, I've actually visited the basement of the Killer Brick Rancher. So when you're recording live from there, I know what that little studio looks like. We didn't record from down there, but yeah, it was really cool to visit the area and see some of the famous places that I've heard about on the show, and then to see them in person. Yeah, it was a special time for me. And then we shot up to the Rutgers Field Day, and that was incredible. You are an alumni of the Rutgers Turfgrass program, and we got up there early and we swung by a bagel place that was great because I generally avoid bagels when I'm not in the New York metropolitan area. I don't know if we can call New Brunswick or wherever we were, if we can call that the New York metro area. For me, it's pretty close to New York, and it was a
It's close
nice.
enough. I would
It's
say
close
I would
enough. It's
consider that that is the beginning of it. I believe when you hit exit 9 on the turnpike, you are in the realm of the New York metropolitan area.
Well, good. So we weren't out of order in having bagels before we headed over to the field day, and then man, we saw some fascinating stuff there. I've written about that a bit on Pace Turf. I don't think we got your subscription or membership activated yet, but we'll be looking for that. I have written about that a little bit at Pace Turf, and there's still some more to come because it was just amazing what you can do with Poa annua just by pH manipulation. Uh, and
Yeah, I think
that was fascinating.
Matt Elmore's research was the most fascinating, coolest part of that trip and what he's
And,
trying to
and
accomplish. And
and
it's
that's
a
not even presented at the field day. It's like secret, and you got that secret tour, and he even printed out the plot plan and handed that to us. So that was
yeah,
really cool for us to see that.
it was really cool, and I think it's a great idea because, like he said, he says this weed scientist we always want to attack it with a chemical, right? We always want to treat it with a pesticide of some sort. And nobody's really looked into how nutrition really extensively. People have, right? But he feels like there needs to be this study on how nutrition affects poa annua, pH, different nutrient values, and how that affects poa annua.
And so he's gonna be working on that. Of course, I've written a few times about Bob Rayleigh and the greens at Thousand Acres up at Deep Creek Lake in Western Maryland. Those greens are absolutely POA free. You can still find POA in the area. You can find POA around the greens. 9 of those holes at Thousand Acres are 15 years old, and somehow they remained pure bentgrass, which is, it's not typical. And part of the reason that Bob is able to achieve those results is through nutrient manipulation and the way that he fertilizes the creeping bentgrass greens. So it's really cool to see Matt start to look into this. And he's been a guest on the Talking Greenkeeper, and probably you will have him back and he can give some updates on that. And then the stuff that was signed and that would made stations at the very impressive Rutgers Field Day was a lot of stuff with like bentgrass variety trials and some stuff with drones and remote sensing and anthracnose and some interesting disease stuff, take all patch, some interesting stuff with crop type or agricultural field type goosegrass versus turf type goosegrass. And with crabgrass too. I think there was all kinds of interesting stuff, and it's exciting to see all of that research, and I really am so glad that you were able to join me on that. And John Emerson came up too, and it was so cool to hang out with John and get to spend some time with him, because he is looking into some really interesting stuff about turf management too, and he has such a practical approach to how turf should be managed. So it was good to spend some time with him too.
Yeah, it's always good hanging out with John, and it was a fun day at John Jacob at Deerfield. I just am so impressed with the job that John Jacob does at Deerfield, particularly with all the rounds they do and how severe that property is and the topography of it. And the job he does is outstanding. And the Rutgers Field Day. Hey, listen, you said I was an alumni, or is it alumnus? What would be, it would be singular as alumnus, right?
I I I I'm not going to answer that question
I
right
think
now.
it's. I think I am.
I'll,
If
I'll
I'm,
take I'll
yeah,
take you.
alumnus.
Yeah, I'll take you for being
I think I'm
correct.
right. I think I could be
Okay.
wrong. We'll have to get the fact checkers out. Anyway, that was my first field day. I had never been before because it's always during that part of the summer where I'm very busy and can never find the time. So it was really nice for me to find the time to go do that. And it was really cool looking at all the different varieties of creeping bent and the super bents, and taking pictures of what looked good. And I was happy when I looked at the A1 A4 plot, and it looked exactly like the greens I was managing. It made
Yeah.
me feel a lot better.
Yep. Because we'd walked on your greens the morning before, and
Yes.
you were kind of like, "Oh, I think it might have a little bit of anthracnose in here," and it just like is looking kind of mottled a little bit. And
Yeah.
I'm like, Joe, it looks normal to me. And then we went and at the field day the very next day, and the pen A1 A4, it does look like your greens, and it's like, yeah, clearly there's better grasses, which is why I was surprised that in 2019 that you were planting and maybe I don't think it was your decision.
No,
Maybe
it
you weren't
wasn't my
even working there
because
at that time, but
yeah,
the,
I would have
it
tried.
was
Well, they have
it was
A1
20-year-old
A4 on
grasses basically.
they have A1 A4 on the greens on Dupont Course, so it's the old, we're familiar with this, we know how to manage it. So I think that's kind of why they went with it. The same reason they went with bent grass on the tees. It's most of our fairway surfaces on Dupont are bent grass. Besides the Nemours course, which is ryegrass, and I think the ryegrass fairways on the Moors have performed tremendously this year. Tyler Thien has done a great job with those, the superintendent of the Nemours course. But yeah, kind of the same reasons. And I know from talking with the superintendents after I arrived here that there was a discussion on whether to do Bermuda grass or bent, and they went with bent for that reason, to have a similar surface that they're playing off of on the Dupont course. But like I said earlier, you see how that thing is used. Bermuda grass, in hindsight, was the better choice, and we're going to rectify that error this next summer and go back to Bermuda grass, or go to Bermuda grass.
Well, if you're in the transition zone, sometimes it's not even necessary to say error, because there's really no right answer, because
Right.
There's various ways to describe grass in the transition zone, which is like the place where no grass grows well, or basically you have some times of the year that are really, really bad for any grass, because it'll be way too cold for warm season grasses. You run the risk of winter kill, and then it's way too hot, way too humid for some of the cool season grasses. And you can, without professional management and good drainage and air movement and a little bit of luck, and preventative fungicides and wetting agents and all of that stuff, you're going to really, really struggle to keep the cool season alive. So it's a place that, for a turfgrass scientist like me, it's really interesting to go see what's working and what's not. And the Rutgers Field Day shows that, because you could see some of the bent grasses, when they put it under stress and low mowing heights, they almost fail, and you can see some algae and stuff. And then you've got the very best genetics, the very best varieties, and those ones were perfect. And in fact, remember how nice those greens were that we walked on, that they said were Dr. Murphy's top dressing trials, that also were not presented? And like some of those that are intensively maintained, that's really nice. And that's, I think, was all the same kind of grass, but it was just different soil conditions, different sand textures. I believe that's what we were walking on. Some of it maybe was even not top dress. Some of it is cord, some of it not cord, I think. That's an interesting bit of research too. So yeah,
That one was cool. I kind of forgot about that. And that was what we checked out last as we were leaving. And yeah, that was really cool. And how because it's a flat piece of ground, and some areas have been top dressed and some haven't, there are these dips in the plots that are noticeable, because it's been going on for over 10 years, around 10 years.
I think it's more than 10.
Yeah, it was interesting, and checking out the different plots and trying to decipher, okay, was this an area that wasn't top dressed? And you can kind of tell it wasn't top dressed because it was lower. It has the surface hadn't been raised by the continual top dressing, and I couldn't tell a difference between turf quality in the area that was top dressed as opposed to not. It was interesting. It's going to be fascinating when he releases that, that research on what happens, and what he kind of comes up with.
I think there might be an article in the Green Section Record that maybe covered like the first 6 years of that or something. I seem to recall that there's an article in the Green Section Record from a decade ago, or maybe more. And I guess that what I was looking at was a continuation of that study where he just continued with that. And in that, if I remember correctly, that study that was in the Green Section Record showed that the fine sand construction, actually it was a construction study, maybe with a little bit of top dressing, but the finer materials produce better turf, which is interesting. And And that's why this whole grammar of greenkeeping approach that I wrote about in the ATC newsletter this week, the grammar of greenkeeping approach that I wrote about in a blog post today, talking about working at the U.S. Amateur and then the very next week going to the KBC Augusta tournament on warm season grass in Japan, working in another tournament. But seeing how a lot of ATC's soil testing clients or ATC's consulting clients or Pace Turf members are implementing so many of these strategies to really make a site-specific plan for what's going to work well at their facility. And I call that the grammar of greenkeeping, and it's just based on what I wrote in the introduction to the book called The Short Grammar of Greenkeeping, which is that, greenkeeping basically is getting the growth rate right. And so it's about managing the growth rate above ground, managing the growth rate below ground. And if you do that, a lot of the stuff that we learn in the textbooks, we can just we can remember it, but we don't need to worry about applying it. We don't need to focus so much on aerifying on a schedule or fertilizing on a schedule. And we can just let the grass tell us what it needs by measuring the turf grass response, looking at how much the grass is growing, look at what's changing in the soil, making sure we have 100% grass cover, and then we just produce good conditions. So it's basically the same as what you've always been doing with just a couple of tweaks. But I call it the grammar of greenkeeping, and it's really amazing to see it work so well. So that's kind of what I think Dr. Murphy wouldn't say that he's doing the grammar of greenkeeping, but I try to put everything that looks good into the grammar of greenkeeping sphere or into the grammar of greenkeeping philosophy. And he's showing in that research that you can have some pretty amazing grass with some non-standard ways of maintenance, which is what I'm saying. If you apply the grammar of greenkeeping like you're doing at the Montchanin course, you can find what's going to be a site-specific GVX that's going to work for you, a site-specific sand top dressing amount that works for you, and all of that leads to improved golfing surfaces for the members and their important guests.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And Dr. Murphy is inadvertently responsible for why I'm using MLSN right now. So if you go back to my time at Rutgers as an alumnus, our soils teacher was Joel Simmons. And Joel Simmons taught us base cation saturation ratios and the importance, and I'll use air quotes there, of balancing the soils, right? And I remember there was a gentleman in our class, Bob Hensel, who I believe is a golf course superintendent out in Idaho right now, and who worked part-time for Dr. Murphy in his lab while he was a student there, questioned Joel Simmons about base cation saturation ratios, basically saying that the soil doesn't have to be balanced to create a good healthy turf, a good playing surface. And us being all enamored by Joel Simmons, who is very charismatic and is a nice person who taught us what we thought was gospel when it came to soils, Bob questioned him, and we were all like, "What are you thinking about, Hensel? This is crazy. Like, you're crazy. What are you doing?" And so when I started at Cavaliers and when I was doing base cation saturation ratio approach to soils, and I wasn't hitting these targets, and I wasn't having these detrimental, awful results because I wasn't hitting these targets, and started thinking about what I was doing and the need to save money, I went back to that when Bob Hensel questioned Joel Simmons about base cation saturation ratios, along with learning about you. So yeah, so it was inadvertently, I remember that conversation, and it helped me switch my approach to soil nutrition and got me into the grammar of greenkeeping. So thanks, Dr. Murphy, in a roundabout way. And Bob Hensel.
That's awesome. Yeah. Next time I see Dr. Murphy, if I remember, I'll mention that there's a roundabout way that he helped you get into MLSN. So
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. I should tell him myself sometime when I see him. But
yeah,
yeah. Oh, Mike, I have a question for you.
yeah,
Okay, so when is you have the ATC, right? The
uh-huh,
Asian Turfgrass Center.
uh-huh.
So when is the A for Asia gonna switch to A for America? And it's
Uh,
gonna become the American Turfgrass Center.
that would be a good name, wouldn't it?
It would
Uh,
be.
yeah, I don't know. I'm having a fun time in Tokyo right now, and
I can
uh,
imagine.
I've
Well,
been
the only
traveling.
reason I
I've been
say is
traveling for
because
a long
it
time.
was
I just
so
want to go
nice
home
seeing
and
you. The only reason I ask is, and it's selfishly, because it was really nice to hang out and see you and hang out with you. And I just feel like if it was the American Turfgrass Center, we would be hanging out way more. That's
uh,
all. It's just a selfish reason.
well, I would like to play golf. It's a pity that we didn't have time to play golf, but we did get a chance to see lots of grass. So
No, it was
maybe
awesome.
next time we can play a round of golf. Finally, I'll see if you're
I
as
know
good of
you
a
can
golfer
bring
as you are a greenkeeper.
Andrew Thompson with his hickories, and we can hit the hickories on Montchanin. That would be pretty sweet.
That would be. I keep missing Andrew. There was a time in 2018, 2019, 2020 where I saw him like almost every time I went through Fukuoka, but I keep missing him. He's often been back in Australia. So hopefully I'll get a chance to play golf with him again sometime and encourage him to come play the Montchanin with hickories.
That would be great. Well, listen, Mike, I have to get going. I have to get back to work.
Okay. I understand. This was meant to be a really quick call and just check in and blast through that blog post really quick. So I'll let you go,
So
and then
much.
I'll thank you. Thank you. I think you're the first person that I've called in while they're at work. So thank you very much. It was very appropriate.
Awesome. I had a good time. It was great talking to you, and it was great seeing you, and I can't wait to see you again.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. Enjoy the rest of the day, and hope that turf recovers well with that nice rain.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike, and thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay. Bye-bye. All right, everybody. Joe is signing off, and I'm going to be signing off soon. I'm. Thank you, Joe. So yeah, that was the first time that I recall on this show that we've called into a golf course. When I first started with the ATC Double Cut, I had the idea that sometimes I would just call people at the golf course and maybe we'd have a look at the grass. But what I realized was sometimes there's a lot of equipment being operated, and that equipment that's being operated makes noise and it doesn't make such a good background sound for a podcast because most people aren't going to be out there with a special dynamic cardioid microphone that's going to really isolate their voice. So generally we have some audio issues if we do that. Also, there's some connectivity issues when doing that. And also, you can't be out on a golf course talking so loud sometimes because of customers and things like that. Plus, people at work have things to do. So I really haven't pursued that avenue for this podcast, and we're usually sitting at desks or at tables or something like that when we make the calls. But it was fun to go visit Joe, and I finally had a little bit of time as my travels have slowed just a little bit. So I had a bit more time in the hotel room to do a little bit of computer work. So got a blog post up, and then I thought, let me talk to Joe. And he was kind enough to take a little time out of his day to have a discussion with me about the blog post. I will put a direct link to that in the show notes. The title of that blog post is A Visit to the Talking Greenkeeper. I will put a direct link to the show to that post in the show notes, and I will also put a link to Joe's podcast, which I think most of you will be familiar with. But if not, I will make sure that that I put that there also, so you can check it out. And that little ad read, which I did, that is for his upcoming season 7. And I think there will be some very good episodes on that. And probably I might even get a chance to be a guest again if all goes well. So that would be pretty cool. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening and for watching. And I will go ahead and sign off now with a promise to be back before too long with a bit more turfgrass information for you and good stuff from the ATC website. For ATC from Tokyo, Japan, I'm Michael Woods. Bye-bye.